Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive on something I think we can all relate to, loneliness.
Yeah, it's definitely a universal feeling.
It is. But there are so many misconceptions surrounding loneliness. We're going to look into those today.
Sound good.
And we're going to use this book as a guide, The Biggest Lies You've Been Told About Loneliness.
Okay.
Before we really jump into all of that, I'm curious, from your perspective, why is it so important that we understand loneliness?
Well, I think it's important because loneliness is more than an emotion.
Okay.
It's a signal, almost like a biological alarm bell telling us that something's not quite right with our connection to other people.
So we shouldn't ignore it.
Well, ignoring it is kind of like ignoring those hunger pangs.
Oh, okay.
It can really have a negative impact on our well-being.
Got it. Don't ignore those loneliness pangs. So this book jumps right into these so-called lies about loneliness.
Right.
And the first one that it mentions is that if you're lonely, it means that nobody cares about you. And it's funny because I feel like that's a message that a lot of us maybe get growing up.
It is, yeah, and it's a dangerous oversimplification.
Okay.
Research actually shows that loneliness isn't about being physically alone, but it's more about the quality of the connections that we have.
So you could be surrounded by people,
You could.
but still feel lonely.
Exactly. If those relationships lack depth or meaning, that loneliness signal is still going to flare up.
So it's not about the quantity of friends, but the quality of the friends.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Like having hundreds of social media followers versus a few really close confidants that you can truly be yourself with.
Yeah, the source uses a similar analogy. It's not about being a social butterfly,
Okay.
flitting from one interaction to the next.
Yeah.
It's more about having those core relationships where you feel truly seen and understood.
That makes a lot of sense. But then the next lie that the book talks about almost seems to contradict that.
Right.
It's the idea that loneliness is always a bad thing.
Right.
So are we saying it's not?
Well, think about it like this. Physical pain tells us that something's wrong with our body, right?
Yeah.
Loneliness, in a way, is like emotional pain that might be signaling a need for deeper connection. And if we just try to numb it or ignore it, we might miss the opportunity to actually address what's truly causing it.
So rather than dreading loneliness, we can almost see it as a chance to learn something about ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, some of the most creative and insightful individuals in history thrived in solitude.
Right.
It allowed them to reflect, process their thoughts, and ultimately create incredible works of art or groundbreaking ideas.
I'm starting to see loneliness in a whole new light here, but there's this stereotype, I think, that it only affects certain types of people,
Yeah.
like the elderly or people who are shy or socially awkward.
Wow.
What does the book say about that?
Well, that's lie number 3, and thankfully research is really busting that myth wide open. We're seeing a rise in loneliness across all age groups, and especially among young people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the source points to social media as a possible culprit here.
That's interesting because I can see how, I guess, being constantly bombarded by everyone else's seemingly perfect lives
Yes.
could make you feel more alone.
Yeah, it creates this illusion of connection, but often lacks the depth and nuance of real-world interactions.
So you can have a packed social calendar and thousands of online friends,
You can.
but still feel a deep sense of isolation.
Right, if those connections aren't truly fulfilling.
Yeah, so just being around people or having a lot of online interactions isn't enough.
It's not, no.
It's about feeling genuinely seen and heard.
Absolutely. And this ties into, I think, the fourth lie that we'll unpack, which is the idea that social media can actually cure loneliness.
It's funny because I think deep down we all know that's not true.
Right.
But it is so easy to get caught up in that illusion of connection that social media offers.
It is, yeah.
We can spend hours scrolling and still feel empty afterward.
Yeah. And that's because social media often presents a very curated, filtered version of reality.
Right.
So we end up comparing ourselves to these idealized versions of others, which can actually intensify feelings of loneliness and inadequacy.
It's like comparing your blooper reel to everybody else's highlight reel.
Exactly. Yeah.
So even though social media can be a tool for communication,
It can.
it's not a replacement for real, genuine human connection.
It's not, no.
It's like the difference between sending a quick text message
Yeah,
and having a deep, meaningful conversation face to face.
exactly. And what's more, research actually suggests that prioritizing those deeper offline connections can actually lead to a decrease in loneliness.
Okay, so the next time somebody tells me to just go out and meet people, if I'm feeling lonely, what should I say?
Yeah.
Because that just seems like overly simplistic advice, and even this book calls that out as a lie.
It is, yeah. And that's because while socializing is important, simply being around people isn't the answer.
Yeah.
You can be at a party surrounded by people
Oh, yeah.
and still feel completely alone.
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
You're physically present, but there's no real connection.
No.
It's like being surrounded by strangers, even if you know their names.
Precisely. And again, it goes back to that idea of quality over quantity.
Okay.
It's not about the number of people that you interact with, but the depth and authenticity of those interactions.
Yes, got it.
The source encourages us to focus on building relationships with people who share our values, interests, and with whom we can have those deep, meaningful conversations.
So it's not just about expanding your social circle, but being intentional about the kinds of relationships you're nurturing.
It is, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. But there's this other misconception that the source addresses. It's the idea that being alone automatically means you're lonely.
Right.
So what's the difference?
That's a great question, and it's something a lot of people struggle with. But the difference lies in choice.
Okay.
Solitude, or choosing to be alone, can be incredibly restorative.
Right.
It gives us the chance to recharge, reflect, and connect with our inner selves.
Right.
Loneliness, on the other hand, is that unwanted feeling of isolation and disconnect.
So it's like, I might choose to spend a quiet evening at home reading a book, which is solitude.
Yes.
But feeling lonely is more like, being at that party surrounded by people, but feeling invisible.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
what's interesting is that learning to embrace solitude and enjoy our own company can actually help us combat loneliness in the long run,
Okay.
because it allows us to approach relationships from a place of wholeness
Yeah.
rather than neediness.
That's a really good point. It's about learning to be comfortable with ourselves.
Exactly.
So we're not relying on others to fill a void.
Yeah,
But what about when that loneliness feels like it's never going to end?
right.
The source actually calls this another lie, that loneliness will last forever. What's the truth?
The truth is, just like any emotion, loneliness is temporary.
Okay.
It ebbs and flows.
Okay.
It might feel overwhelming in the moment,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to define us or control our lives.
So even if we're feeling really lonely right now, it doesn't mean we're doomed to feel this way forever.
It doesn't. No, not at all. And what's even more encouraging is that we have the power to shift our perspective
Okay.
and use loneliness as a catalyst for positive change.
That's a great point, and I think that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive, where we can explore some of the ways to challenge these lies and actually start combating loneliness.
Absolutely.
But before we do that, I think we're going to take a quick pause and come back to it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about how even though loneliness can feel overwhelming, it's not a permanent state.
Right.
So what can we actually do about it,
Yeah.
especially if we've been believing some of these lies about loneliness?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it?
It is.
Because knowledge is only powerful if we actually apply it.
Right.
So I think that the first step is to actually acknowledge the feeling.
Okay.
Don't try to brush it under the rug or pretend it's not there.
That sounds kind of like what we were talking about before with not ignoring it as a signal.
It is.
But acknowledging it can be tough, especially if, we've been told we shouldn't feel lonely.
Oh, absolutely. There's often this shame attached to loneliness, like it means we failed somehow.
Right.
But the truth is, it's a human emotion.
Yeah.
It's as natural as joy or sadness.
Okay.
And like any emotion, it's trying to tell us something.
So instead of judging ourselves for feeling lonely, we should try to understand what it's trying to tell us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is it a lack of close connections?
Okay.
Are we feeling unseen or unheard in our existing relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's a sign that we need to prioritize our own needs and passions.
So I'm hearing a theme here. Self-reflection is important.
Yes.
We can't fix what we don't understand. But once we do understand what's fueling the loneliness, what then?
Then we can take action. And it doesn't have to be some huge life-altering move.
Okay.
Sometimes the smallest steps can make the biggest difference.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, think back to that lie about social media being a cure.
Yeah.
What if, instead of endlessly scrolling, you reached out to a friend you haven't spoken to in a while and actually scheduled a phone call or a video chat?
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Or even just sending a thoughtful text message.
Yeah.
Just making a conscious effort to nurture those real-life connections.
Exactly. Or if you're feeling lonely because you're lacking a sense of purpose or belonging,
Right.
think about joining a club or group that aligns with your interests.
Oh, okay.
That can be a fantastic way to meet like-minded people and feel a sense of community.
So it's about getting out there, even if it's just a little bit at a time,
It is.
being open to new experiences.
Yes, and don't underestimate the power of simply being present in your own life. Put down the phone, step away from the screens, and engage with the world around you. Go for a walk in nature. Strike up a conversation with a stranger at the coffee shop.
Yeah.
Or try a new hobby.
And there's that other lie that we talked about.
Right.
Being alone equals being lonely.
Yes.
Maybe some of those solo activities could actually help us build that comfort with ourselves.
That's a great point. Learning to enjoy our own company is a huge step towards combating loneliness.
Right.
It allows us to connect with our own inner world,
Yeah.
which could be incredibly enriching.
Okay. I'm loving all this practical advice, but what about the people who feel like they've tried everything and nothing seems to work?
Right.
What if that loneliness feels like this constant shadow?
Well, first, I'd say it's crucial to remember you're not alone in feeling that way.
Yeah.
Loneliness is a universal experience.
Right.
And there are countless others out there who understand exactly what you're going through.
That's so important, just knowing that you're not alone.
Yeah. It can make a huge difference.
But what about getting help?
Yeah.
Is that something we should talk about?
Absolutely. If loneliness is becoming a chronic issue
Okay.
and is significantly impacting your well-being, seeking professional help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
So talk to a therapist, a
Yeah.
counselor.
Yes, they can provide a safe space to explore the underlying causes of your loneliness and develop coping mechanisms.
Okay.
They can also help you challenge those negative thought patterns that might be contributing to your isolation.
That makes sense because sometimes loneliness can be a symptom of something deeper, like depression or anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a therapist can help you address those underlying issues as well.
Right.
But even if you're not ready for therapy,
Yeah.
there are other resources available.
Okay.
Support groups, online communities, even hotlines.
Right.
There are so many places where you can connect with others and find support.
Even just talking to a trusted friend or family member can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Just getting those feelings out in the open can make a big difference.
It really can. And I think the key takeaway here is there's no shame in seeking help.
Yeah.
Whatever form that takes.
Right.
You deserve to feel connected and supported, and there are people and resources out there who can help you get there.
That's a powerful message. So we've talked about acknowledging the feeling, understanding its root causes, taking action, and seeking help if needed.
Yeah.
What else should people keep in mind as they navigate this journey?
Patience. Building meaningful connections and overcoming loneliness takes time and effort.
Right.
It's not a quick fix. It's a process. And there will be ups and downs along the way.
That's so true because we live in a culture that values instant gratification.
They do.
But real connection doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't, no.
It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to be vulnerable.
And don't forget to celebrate those small victories along the way.
Oh, yeah.
Did you reach out to a friend you haven't spoken to in a while? Did you try a new activity? Did you spend some quality time alone without feeling lonely?
Right.
Those are all wins, and they deserve to be acknowledged.
I love that. It's about shifting our focus from what we're lacking to what we're gaining,
It is.
even if it's a baby step in the right direction.
Exactly. And remember, the journey itself is valuable.
Okay.
You're learning about yourself, about your needs, and about what truly brings you joy and connection.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like we've debunked some major myths about loneliness
Yeah.
and offered some real actionable advice for people who are struggling.
Hopefully.
But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I want to touch on.
Okay.
The source mentions this idea that loneliness can actually be an opportunity for growth, which sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
Can you elaborate on that? It just seems strange to think of loneliness as a positive thing,
It does.
But the source frames it as this potential catalyst for growth.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about that.
It is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? But think about it this way. Loneliness often forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our lives. It can push us to examine our relationships, our values, even our sense of purpose.
So instead of running from that discomfort of loneliness,
Yeah.
we can lean into it and see what it might be trying to teach us.
Exactly. It can be a very powerful teacher if we're willing to listen.
Okay.
Maybe it's prompting you to set healthier boundaries in your relationships,
Right.
or to finally pursue that passion project you've been putting off. Or maybe it's simply a reminder to slow down, reconnect with yourself, and prioritize your own well-being.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
It's like taking this negative emotion and
Ah.
turning it into this force for positive change.
Yeah,
But I think a lot of people might be skeptical.
right.
How do we actually make that shift?
So it starts with self-compassion.
Okay.
Instead of beating yourself up for feeling lonely, try to approach those feelings with curiosity and understanding. Ask yourself, what is this loneliness trying to tell me? What needs to change?
So it's about listening to that inner voice, that signal that we talked about before.
Exactly.
Deciphering its message.
Exactly. And then it's about taking action.
Right.
What small step can you take today to address those needs? Maybe it's reaching out to a friend,
Right.
signing up for that class, or simply scheduling some quiet time for reflection.
So it all comes back to those small, consistent actions.
It does. Yeah.
It's not about some grand overnight transformation.
No.
It's those little steps forward, day by day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you start to take those steps, I think you'll find that loneliness begins to lose its grip on you. You'll start to feel more empowered, more connected, and ultimately more fulfilled.
I love that. It's like we're taking back control.
Yes, you are.
We're not letting loneliness dictate our lives. We're choosing to learn from it
Exactly.
and grow from it.
Yeah. You're choosing to create a life that feels more aligned with your values and your authentic self. And in doing so, you're not only combating loneliness, but you're also creating a ripple effect that can positively impact those around you.
That's such an important reminder. We're all interconnected.
We are.
And the more we work on ourselves and our own well-being,
Yeah.
the more we can contribute to a more compassionate and connected world.
Absolutely. And that's why understanding and addressing loneliness is so crucial.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual happiness.
Right.
It's about creating a society where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
I think that's a beautiful message to end on.
It is.
So to all of you listening, remember, you're not alone.
You're not.
Loneliness is a universal experience,
It is.
and it doesn't have to define you. You have the power to choose connection,
You do.
to choose growth, and to create a life that feels rich and meaningful.
Absolutely. And if you're struggling, please reach out for help.
Yeah.
There are so many resources available, and there are people who care and want to support you on this journey.
Thank you so much for this incredible deep dive.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
It's been truly enlightening. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep diving deep.
Yes.
We'll see you next time.